The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of rural Montana when Sarah Chen's radio crackled to life with static. She had been tracking wildlife migration patterns for the state environmental agency, her equipment spread across the dashboard of her dusty pickup truck. The transmission came through broken and desperate, cutting through the peaceful silence of the countryside. Mayday. Mayday. This is Flight November 742. Engine failure. Going down somewhere over the Blackfoot Valley. The voice belonged to a young man, barely audible through the interference. Sarah's heart raced as she realized she might be the only person in range to receive this emergency call. She grabbed her radio immediately, her hands trembling slightly. Flight November 742. This is Sarah Chen with Montana Environmental Services. I copy your distress call. What is your current position? Only static answered her back. She tried again, adjusting frequencies, but the aircraft had gone silent. Without hesitation, Sarah started her truck and began driving toward higher ground where she might get better radio reception. The gravel road kicked up dust clouds behind her as she pressed the accelerator, her mind racing with possibilities. She had basic emergency training from her job, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. As she reached a hilltop, Sarah pulled out her binoculars and scanned the horizon. In the distance, she spotted a small plume of smoke rising from beyond a ridge of pine trees. Her stomach dropped as she realized the aircraft had likely crashed. She immediately radioed the local sheriff's department and emergency services, providing them with coordinates and her planned route to the crash site. The terrain ahead was rough and her truck could only go so far. Sarah parked at the edge of a steep ravine and gathered her emergency supplies: first aid kit, water bottles, an emergency blanket, and her satellite phone. She had no idea what she would find, but she knew that every minute could mean the difference between life and death for whoever was on that aircraft. The hike down into the ravine was treacherous, with loose rocks and thorny brush tearing at her clothes. Sarah had grown up hiking these mountains with her father, so she moved with practiced confidence despite the urgency. The smoke was getting thicker as she approached, and she could smell the acrid scent of burning fuel mixed with pine needles. When she finally reached the crash site, her heart sank. The small Cessna had struck a cluster of tall pines and broken apart, its wings scattered across the forest floor. The cockpit section had come to rest against a large boulder, and Sarah could see movement inside. She approached carefully, calling out to let the occupant know help had arrived. Inside the wreckage, she found Marcus Rivera, a 28-year-old flight instructor who had been returning from a training session when his engine failed. He was conscious but trapped, his left leg pinned beneath twisted metal. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead and he was clearly in shock. Sarah immediately applied pressure to his head wound while assessing his other injuries. "Thank God, someone heard me," Marcus whispered, his voice weak but grateful. I thought I was going to die out here alone." Sarah worked quickly to stabilize his condition, using her first aid training to treat his visible injuries. She knew that moving him incorrectly could cause more damage, so she focused on keeping him warm and alert while help arrived. As she worked, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks in the soft earth near the crash, sight and cigarette butts that were still smoldering. Someone else had been here recently, someone who had apparently left when they heard her approaching through the forest. Sarah's discovery of the tire tracks sent a chill down her spine, but she forced herself to focus on Marcus's immediate needs. She used her satellite phone to call for a medical helicopter, providing precise GPS coordinates to the dispatcher. The nearest hospital was 40 miles away, and the rough terrain would make ground transport nearly impossible. While waiting for help to arrive, Sarah learned more about Marcus and why he had been flying alone that morning. He was a decorated former Air Force pilot who now taught civilian flight training at a small airport near Missoula. He had been returning from a routine maintenance check on the aircraft when the engine suddenly seized without warning. "The weird thing is," Marcus said through gritted teeth as Sarah adjusted the makeshift splint on his leg, "this plane just had a complete inspection last week. Everything was perfect. The engine failure, it didn't feel normal. It was too sudden, too complete." Sarah noticed that Marcus kept glancing nervously at the tree line, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. When she asked about it, he lowered his voice and shared something that made her realize this crash might not have been an accident. 3 days earlier, he had witnessed something while flying over this same area that had troubled him deeply. During a training flight with a student, Marcus had spotted what appeared to be an illegal logging operation in a restricted watershed area. He had photographed the activity and reported it to the Forest Service, not thinking much of it at the time. However, the next day, he received an anonymous phone call warning him to mind his own business and forget what he had seen. Sound of approaching vehicles made them both tense. Sarah expected to hear the distinctive whop-whop of helicopter rotors, but instead she heard the rumble of truck engines coming from multiple directions. Through the trees, she could see dust clouds rising from at least 3 different access roads leading to their location. "That's not the rescue team," Marcus whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "They wouldn't approach from that direction, and there are too many vehicles. Sarah, I think we might be in serious danger here." Sarah's mind raced as she considered their options. They were in a remote ravine with limited escape routes, and Marcus was unable to walk. Her truck was parked nearly a mile away up a steep slope, and she had no weapons beyond a small utility knife in her emergency kit. The approaching vehicles were still several minutes away, but their time was running out. She quickly helped Marcus move to a more concealed position behind the largest piece of aircraft wreckage, using the emergency blanket to camouflage their location. Sarah then climbed a nearby tree to get a better view of who was coming, her heart pounding as she realized they might be dealing with people willing to kill to protect their illegal activities. From her elevated position, Sarah could see 3 pickup trucks converging on their location, each carrying multiple passengers. The vehicle stopped about a quarter-mile away, and she watched through her binoculars as armed men in camouflage clothing began spreading out in a coordinated search pattern. These were not random criminals, but organized individuals who clearly had military or law enforcement training. One of the men was giving orders to the others, pointing in different directions and apparently coordinating a systematic search of the crash site. Sarah noticed that he wore a distinctive red bandana across his face and carried what appeared to be a high-powered rifle with a scope. The way he moved and positioned himself suggested he was an experienced marksman. Sarah quickly climbed down and returned to Marcus, explaining what she had observed. Together, they realized they were being hunted by people who wanted to ensure that Marcus would never be able to testify about the illegal logging operation he had witnessed. The aircraft malfunction had likely been sabotage, and now their witnesses needed to be eliminated. As the searchers drew closer, Sarah made a desperate decision. She activated the emergency beacon on her satellite phone and sent a detailed message to both the Sheriff's Department and the FBI field office in Billings, explaining their situation and the coordinates of the illegal logging site Marcus had discovered. If they didn't survive, at least the authorities would know what had happened and why. The sound of boots crushing through underbrush grew closer as Sarah and Marcus huddled behind the twisted remains of the aircraft's fuselage. Sarah's hands shook as she checked her phone one more time, hoping for a response from emergency services, but the message showed as delivered with no reply. They were on their own. "There's something else you should know," Marcus whispered, his face pale from pain and blood loss. "The logging site I photographed. It's not just illegal cutting. I saw them loading trucks with something else. Something covered by tarps. And there were armed guards posted around the perimeter like it was some kind of military operation." Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized they had stumbled into something much bigger than illegal logging. The organized response from their pursuers suggested this was connected to serious criminal activity, possibly drug trafficking or worse. The remote location would be perfect for smuggling operations that needed to avoid detection by law enforcement. Voice called out from somewhere in the trees above them. "We know you're down there. Make this easy on yourselves and come out, we just want to talk." The tone was calm and professional, which somehow made it even more terrifying than if the man had been shouting threats. Sarah noticed that the voice had a slight accent, possibly Eastern European, and carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She risked a quick peek around the wreckage and saw a tall figure in military-style clothing about 50 yards away, methodically checking potential hiding spots with practiced efficiency. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm and pointed to a narrow gap between two large boulders about 20 feet away. If we can reach those rocks, there's a cave system behind them. I saw it during the crash. It's not deep, but it might give us better cover and a back way out. The decision to move was terrifying, but staying put meant certain capture. Sarah helped Marcus to his feet, supporting most of his weight as they slowly made their way toward the rocks. Every step seemed to echo through the forest, and Sarah expected to hear gunshots at any moment. They had almost reached the boulder formation when a twig snapped loudly under Marcus's injured leg. The sound carried clearly through the quiet forest, and immediately they heard shouts from multiple directions as their pursuers converged on their position. Sarah half-carried, half-dragged Marcus through the gap between the rocks, just as bullets began splintering the trees around them. The cave was larger than Marcus had thought, extending back into the hillside for about 30 feet, before narrowing to a crawl space. Ancient Native American pictographs covered the walls, suggesting this had been a shelter for centuries. More importantly, there was a small opening at the back that led to another ravine on the far side of the hill. "You two made a big mistake," the accented voice called from outside the cave entrance. "We have all the time in the world, and you have nowhere to go. Come out now and we'll make this quick and painless. Keep hiding and, well, let's just say there are worse ways to die than a bullet." Sarah's mind raced as she assessed their situation. The cave provided temporary shelter, but they were effectively trapped with an injured man and no weapons against multiple armed pursuers. However, she noticed that the acoustics of the cave seemed to amplify and distort sounds, making it difficult for their enemies to pinpoint their exact location inside. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus pulled a small device from his jacket pocket. "Emergency strobe light," he explained quietly. "Standard equipment for pilots. If I can get this positioned right, it might create enough of a distraction for you to escape through the back opening and get help." Sarah shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you here alone. We'll find another way." But even as she said it, she could hear their pursuers discussing plans to flush them out with smoke or other means. Time was running out, and soon they would have no options left. That's when they heard something unexpected from outside the cave. A single gunshot, followed by confused shouting and the sound of someone crashing through the undergrowth. The voices of their pursuers suddenly became urgent and concerned, as if they were now dealing with an unexpected threat from a different direction. "What the hell was that?" one of them called out. "Rodriguez, report your position." When no answer came, the tone shifted from confident control to nervous uncertainty. Someone else was out there in the forest, someone their enemies hadn't been expecting. The forest fell eerily silent after the gunshot, broken only by the whispered communications of their pursuers as they tried to regroup and identify this new threat. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances in the dim light of the cave, both wondering if rescue had arrived or if they were caught in the middle of a conflict between different criminal groups. Another shot rang out, this one clearly from a high-powered rifle, and they heard one of the men outside curse loudly in what sounded like Russian. The confident, organized hunt had suddenly turned into something chaotic and unpredictable. Through the cave opening, they could see figures moving rapidly between trees, no longer focused on flushing out their hiding spot. "Professional sniper," Marcus whispered, his military training helping him analyze the situation. "Whoever's out there knows what they're doing. Those shots are coming from at least 300 yards away, probably from the ridge we came down. They have a clear field of fire on this entire area." The leader's accented voice called out again, but now it carried a note of frustration rather than calm control. "Fall back to the vehicles. We'll return with more equipment." Sarah heard the sound of boots retreating through the forest, but she wasn't sure if this was a genuine withdrawal or a tactical repositioning. Minutes passed with no further sounds from outside the cave. Then, unexpectedly, a woman's voice called, out from somewhere among the trees. "You two in the cave, my name is Elena Vasquez. I'm a federal wildlife officer, and I've been tracking the illegal activities in this area for weeks. Are either of you injured?" Sarah looked at Marcus, uncertain whether to trust this new voice. It could be a trap, or it could be the answer to their prayers. The voice sounded genuinely concerned and carried an authority that felt different from their previous pursuers. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah called back, "Yes, we have an injured crash victim who needs medical attention." "Stay put for now," Elena's voice responded. "I've called for backup in a medical helicopter, but it'll be at least 30 minutes before they arrive. The men who were hunting you have retreated, but they may try to circle back. I'm going to work my way closer to your position." Over the next few minutes, Elena's voice grew clearer as she approached, and she began explaining her situation. She was an undercover federal agent who had been investigating a complex criminal network that used the remote forest areas for drug trafficking and money laundering operations. The illegal logging was just one part of a larger scheme that involved corrupt local officials and international smuggling rings. "Your pilot friend there," Elena called out. "He photographed something that could bring down the entire operation. That's why they sabotaged his aircraft and are so determined to eliminate both of you as witnesses." When Elena finally appeared at the cave entrance, Sarah was surprised to see a small athletic woman in her 30s, wearing camouflage clothing and carrying a sniper rifle with a sophisticated scope. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and a black bandana covered the lower half of her face. Her eyes were alert and professional, constantly scanning the forest for threats. "I've been tracking this group for 3 months," Elena explained as she quickly examined Marcus's injuries and applied fresh bandages from her medical kit. "They're part of a network that smuggles drugs and weapons across the Canadian border, using the logging operations as cover for their transportation routes." Elena shared that she had been positioned on the ridge conducting surveillance when she intercepted Sarah's emergency transmission about the aircraft crash. When she realized the criminal organization was mobilizing to eliminate witnesses, she had taken position to protect them until official backup could arrive. "The man giving orders out there is Viktor Petrov, a former Russian military officer who now runs enforcement for the smuggling network," Elena continued. "He's extremely dangerous and has killed several people who got too close to their operations. You were lucky I was in the area." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Victor's voice echoed from somewhere in the distance, clearly transmitted through a bullhorn or radio system. "Agent Vasquez, we know who you are now. We have your backup, routes identified, and your extraction points covered. Surrender our witnesses and we'll let you live to testify at our trials." Elena's expression hardened as she checked her rifle and adjusted her scope. "He's lying about having my routes covered, but he's not bluffing about being willing to kill. Federal agents, this situation just became much more serious than a simple witness protection scenario." The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, but Elena's face showed concern rather than relief. "That's not our cavalry," she said grimly. "Medical helicopters don't fly in formation like that, and they're coming from the wrong direction." Victor called in reinforcements. The approaching helicopters created a thunderous noise that echoed off the canyon walls, and Elena quickly moved to the cave entrance to assess the threat. Through her rifle scope, she could see 2 black helicopters without official markings, circling the area, clearly searching for landing zones. These were not rescue aircraft, but military-style transports carrying additional personnel for the criminal organization. "We need to move now," Elena said urgently, helping Sarah support Marcus as they prepared to leave their hiding place. "They're going to flood this area with people, and my position will be compromised. There's a ranger station about 2 miles north, but we'll have to cross some very dangerous terrain to reach it." Elena led them through the narrow opening at the back of the cave, which opened onto a steep slope covered with loose rock and scrub pine. The descent was treacherous under normal circumstances, but with Marcus's injured leg and the need for stealth, every step was a potential disaster. Sarah found herself half sliding down the hillside, trying to control their speed while keeping Marcus from crying out in pain. Behind them, they could hear the helicopters landing and the voices of many men organizing search teams. Victor's voice carried clearly through the forest as he coordinated his expanded operation, dividing the area into search grids and posting guards at key locations. The professional military precision of the operation was terrifying to witness. Elena paused frequently to check their back trail and scan ahead for threats, her sniper rifle ready for immediate use. She explained in whispered conversations that she had been working this case for months, building evidence against a network that reached from local police departments all the way to international criminal organizations based in Eastern Europe. "The logging operation is actually quite clever," she whispered as they rested behind a fallen tree. "They use the legitimate timber trucks to transport drugs and weapons, knowing that Forest Service checkpoints rarely stop commercial logging vehicles. The operation generates millions in revenue while appearing completely legal from the outside." Marcus, despite his pain and exhaustion, provided valuable intelligence about what he had observed during his aerial reconnaissance. He described seeing armed guards, heavy equipment that seemed out of place for a logging operation, and most importantly, a sophisticated communications array that suggested coordination with outside organizations. "There was something else," Marcus said quietly as Elena treated his wound with supplies from her field kit. "I saw helicopters landing at their site, not logging equipment helicopters, but unmarked aircraft like the ones that just arrived. And there were people in expensive suits meeting with the operation leaders." Elena's expression grew grim as she processed this information. "If they're bringing in outside investors or government officials, this is much bigger than we initially thought. No wonder they're willing to risk so much to eliminate witnesses." The sound of search dogs barking in the distance made them all freeze with terror. Elena immediately began leading them in a different direction, away from the ranger station and toward a more remote area where the scent trail would be harder to follow. The change in route added miles to their journey, but it was their only hope of staying ahead of their pursuers. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the terrain became increasingly difficult, but it also provided better defensive positions and more options for concealment. Elena's military training became evident as she selected routes that would be difficult to track and positioned them with clear fields of fire in case they were discovered. "There's something you both need to know," Elena said, as they rested in a grove of aspen trees. "I haven't been entirely honest about who I work for. I'm not just a federal wildlife officer. I'm with a joint task force that investigates international criminal networks, and this operation connects to much larger cases we're working across multiple states." The revelation that Elena was essentially a federal agent working on international cases explained her sophisticated equipment and extensive training, but it also meant that the criminal organization would stop at nothing to prevent her from testifying about what she had discovered. As if to emphasize the point, Victor's voice echoed through the forest again, this time much closer than before. "Agent Vasquez, you're only delaying the inevitable. We have resources you can't imagine, and we will find you. Make this easier on everyone and surrender now." Elena responded by carefully taking aim through her rifle scope and firing a single shot that struck a tree inches from where Victor had been standing. The message was clear. She was an expert marksman, she knew his location, and she was not planning to surrender. Elena's warning shot had the desired effect, causing Victor's search teams to take cover and approach more cautiously, but it also revealed their position to the enemy forces. Within minutes, they could hear coordinated movement through the forest, as multiple teams began converging on their location from different directions. "Time for the final play," Elena said grimly, checking her remaining ammunition and surveying the terrain around their position. They had reached a small clearing on a ridge that provided excellent visibility in all directions, but also left them exposed to attack from multiple angles. Elena quickly began setting up what she called a defensive position, using fallen logs and natural rock formations to create cover for Sarah and Marcus, while giving herself clear shooting lanes toward the approaching threats. Her movements were precise and efficient, suggesting extensive combat experience beyond typical federal agent training. "I need to tell you both something," Elena said, as she adjusted her rifle scope. "The backup I called for isn't just local law enforcement. I've been in contact with a joint FBI and DEA task force that's been tracking this network for over a year. They should be arriving by helicopter within the next 15 minutes. The sound of multiple helicopters approaching from the south confirmed Elena's statement, but Victor's forces were already too close for a simple extraction. Through the trees, Sarah could see armed figures moving systematically up the slope toward their position, using professional military tactics to maintain cover while advancing. Elena's rifle cracked repeatedly as she engaged targets with surgical precision, each shot carefully aimed to wound rather than kill, demonstrating both her marksmanship skills and her commitment to law enforcement protocols even under extreme circumstances. Her shots forced the advancing teams to take cover and slowed their progress significantly. "Federal agents, drop your weapons and surrender immediately." The amplified voice came from the approaching helicopters, which Sarah could now see were marked with FBI insignia. The aircraft began circling the area, and tactical teams began rappelling down ropes to secure the perimeter. Victor's response was immediate and violent. Heavy automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions as his forces attempted to fight their way out of the encirclement. The forest erupted in chaos as federal agents engaged the criminal organization in a running battle across the mountainous terrain. Elena continued providing covering fire while coordinating with the FBI tactical teams via radio, providing intelligence about enemy positions and the location of the witnesses she had been protecting. Her calm professionalism under fire impressed both Sarah and Marcus, who watched in amazement as she directed the complex law enforcement operation. The battle lasted nearly 30 minutes before the last of Victor's forces either surrendered or were neutralized. Victor himself was captured alive, along with several key members of his organization, providing law enforcement with valuable intelligence about the broader criminal network. As medical teams finally reached their position, Elena helped load Marcus onto a stretcher, while briefing the FBI team leaders about the evidence she had gathered during her months-long undercover operation. The illegal logging site would be raided within hours, shutting down a major smuggling route and seizing millions in drugs and weapons. Sarah learned later that Elena had been working undercover for nearly 6 months, building a complete picture of the criminal network while documenting their activities and identifying key personnel. The aircraft sabotage that had started their ordeal was actually the break in the case that law enforcement had been waiting for. Marcus's photographs of the illegal logging operation, combined with Elena's intelligence and testimony from other witnesses, ultimately led to the conviction of over 30 individuals involved in the smuggling network. The case made national headlines and resulted in significant reforms to Forest Service security protocols. 3 months after the incident, Sarah received a letter from Elena, who had been reassigned to another undercover operation, but wanted to thank her for the courage she had shown during the crisis. The letter included an invitation to a ceremony in Washington, where Sarah and Marcus would be recognized for their role in breaking up the criminal network. At the ceremony, Sarah learned that Elena's real name was Elena Rodriguez, and she was one of the most decorated undercover agents in federal service. Her ability to maintain her cover while protecting witnesses had been crucial to the success of the entire operation. The experience had changed Sarah's perspective on her quiet life as an environmental researcher. She realized that even in remote areas, there were people working to protect society from threats that most citizens never knew existed. Her decision to answer that distress signal had not only saved lives, but had helped bring down a major criminal organization.